It begins in a moment so ordinary you almost miss it. A phrase overheard, a song at the right second, a sudden quiet that feels charged with meaning. Something stirs inside you, a recognition older than thought itself. You know this feeling, though you've spent years dismissing it as coincidence, as mind tricks, as nothing. But it isn't nothing. It's the pulse of the universe knocking from the inside, reminding you that reality has always been a conversation, and you've been answering unconsciously. Now, for the first time, you're awake enough to hear the message clearly. The manual was never lost, you just stopped looking. It happens quietly, almost imperceptibly, the moment when something inside you begins to suspect that coincidence was never real. It could be a simple encounter, a phrase overheard at the exact time you needed it, or a strange alignment between thought and event that feels too precise to be random. At first, you brush it off. Just chance, you say, because that's safer. To admit otherwise would mean stepping into a different world, one where your thoughts and perceptions are not mere background noise, but instruments tuning the very frequency of what unfolds. Yesterday, someone told me, "I felt like the universe spoke to me, but I thought it was just a coincidence." That single sentence contains the fracture between sleeping and awakening, because the moment you label a synchronicity as coincidence, you hand the manual of reality back to the void. You say, "I'm not ready to read this yet," and the universe, endlessly patient, simply waits. The real turning point isn't cosmic fireworks or divine revelation. It's the instant you stop dismissing your own perception, when you realize that awareness itself is the message. The universe doesn't speak in words or images. It speaks in patterns, in timing, in the echo between what you feel and what appears. You've seen these alignments before, but you trained yourself not to trust them. Society taught you to worship logic, to distrust subtle knowing. So when the pattern first glimmers through the noise, you turn away thinking that can't mean anything. But it does. Imagine you're tuning an old radio, static, distortion, fragments of melody. When you move the dial just slightly, clarity emerges, the music that was always there. The shift is small, but everything changes. That's what happens the moment you start observing coincidences as mirrors instead of mistakes. You begin to tune into the signal that's been hiding under the noise of daily life. At first, this shift feels unstable. Your mind tries to analyze it, to measure it, to prove it. How do I know this is real? It demands. And that question, innocent as it sounds, is the gatekeeper of your old reality. Because by doubting the experience before you even let it land, you pull yourself back into the old program of separation. Observer here, world out there. But the field doesn't work that way. The act of noticing is already participation. The more consciously you observe, the more the signal strengthens. Try something small. Think of someone you haven't spoken to in years, not with longing or effort, just gentle curiosity. Hold their image for a moment, then release it completely. See what happens in the next few days. Often, you'll get a message, or bump into their name, or find an unexpected reminder of them. That's not proof of magic. It's evidence of coherence, the invisible thread between inner focus and external resonance. What changes here is not the world itself, but your relationship to it. You begin to notice that reality is responsive, conversational. You send out a frequency through your state of being, and life mirrors it back through circumstance, sometimes instantly, sometimes with delay, but always with precision. This is the moment where everything starts to look suspiciously alive. And yet, this awareness demands humility, because as soon as you start to believe you can control reality, the connection falters again. The field isn't a vending machine, it's a mirror of consciousness. You don't command it, you align with it. When you ask the universe for something but hold the energy of doubt or lack, the mirror simply reflects that same vibration back to you. It's not punishment, it's feedback. So the real transformation begins when you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this showing me?" Every situation becomes communication. Every delay, every encounter, every silence carries information about the frequency you're emitting. The universe is not random, it is responsive. The moment when everything changes isn't dramatic, it's intimate. It's the quiet realization that your attention has creative weight. That observation itself bends the flow. The same way a scientist knows that measuring a particle alters its behavior, you begin to see that your awareness reshapes the field you live in. The experiment and the observer are one. When you finally grasp that, not as theory, but as lived experience, the texture of your day shifts. Coincidence turns to coherence, randomness turns to rhythm. You start to feel a subtle dialogue between your inner state and the outer world. And though part of you wants to run back to the comfort of disbelief, another part, the deeper part, whispers, "Stay, keep watching." Because this is the real threshold, the place where denial ends and participation begins. The moment you stop labeling the extraordinary as ordinary and let the universe for the first time speak in its native language, timing, reflection, and response. And once you hear it clearly, you can never unhear it. Something fundamental has shifted. What comes next isn't control, it's revelation. The beginning of seeing how easily illusion can trap you again. You wake up, check your phone, drink your coffee, go through the same motions as yesterday. You tell yourself that you're living life, but beneath the repetition, something is hollow. Every reaction, every thought, every emotion feels automatic, as if life is happening to you, and all you can do is respond. You're not steering, you're being steered. This is the illusion that holds almost everyone captive. The belief that reality is external, objective, untouchable, that your inner state is merely a byproduct, not the source. It's a subtle imprisonment because it feels normal. You see a headline, you feel fear. Someone criticizes you, you feel anger. The weather turns gray, your mood drops. You call this being human, but it's closer to being programmed. The mind interprets stimuli according to old patterns, memories, expectations, labels, and those interpretations shape your entire experience. You think you're seeing the world, but you're only seeing your map of it. This is where the universe begins its quiet experiment with you. It lets the outer conditions mirror your inner ones so that you can notice the loop. If you're anxious, you meet anxious people. If you expect disappointment, you find it everywhere. You assume the world is confirming your beliefs, when in truth it's only reflecting them. That reflection is not punishment, it's instruction. But as long as you think you're reacting to a fixed world out there, you never test the loop. You just reinforce it. There's a particular moment, maybe you've felt it, when you realize your reactions are predictable. You can almost watch yourself from above. There it is again. That same frustration, that same defense, that same story. That's the crack in the illusion. The observer in you wakes up for a second. You see that the emotion is not inevitable. It's chosen, rehearsed, reinforced. And yet, before you can hold the awareness, the old current pulls you back. That current is powerful because it's built on the mind's oldest addiction, control. To stay inside the illusion, you must believe that life is unpredictable, and therefore you must manage it by worrying, by planning, by trying to anticipate every variable. Control gives the ego its sense of purpose. But notice the paradox. The more you try to control, the more chaotic reality feels. Because what you resist, you amplify. What you fear, you feed with attention. Imagine a mirror that reflects not your face, but your state. If you scowl at it, demanding that it smile first, you'll wait forever. That's how most people approach reality. They want the reflection to change before they do. But the mirror can only show what stands before it. When you begin to see this, you also begin to notice how deeply society reinforces the trap. Every advertisement tells you that happiness is external, in the product, the success, the approval. Every cultural story whispers that fulfillment is something to get, and so you chase and chase and chase, never realizing that the chase itself is the mechanism of the illusion. You can't reach wholeness through the feeling of lack. Here's a small experiment. When something triggers you today, a comment, a delay, a discomfort, pause before reacting. Feel the urge to respond, but don't move. Notice the raw energy of reaction in your body. Label it quietly. Here is the illusion trying to pull me back. Then take one conscious breath before doing anything. That single breath is a rebellion against the invisible program. It's the smallest act of freedom, and yet it changes everything. Because in that breath, you're no longer inside the story, you're watching it. The moment you observe rather than identify, the mechanism weakens. You start to see that your thoughts and emotions are not reality. They are filters. And through those filters, the world takes shape. The universe watches how you interpret what it sends. It doesn't care about your words or wishes. It listens to your state. When you say, "I want peace but live in tension," the universe hears tension and mirrors it back. The illusion thrives when you forget this simple symmetry. It wants you to believe you're powerless, that cause and effect flow in only one direction, from outside to in. But it's the other way around. Most people never escape because they keep seeking evidence first. They say, "Show me it works, and then I'll believe." Yet the field doesn't work by proof. It works by resonance. Belief isn't something you earn after results. It's the frequency that allows results to appear. The illusion collapses only when you stop waiting for confirmation and start observing how your inner state correlates with what unfolds. Once you glimpse this, the world begins to look different. Not mystical, not fantastical, just responsive. You start to sense that everything you encounter is feedback, a living, breathing mirror teaching you how creation really functions. And as you test this awareness, something remarkable happens. A subtle doorway opens. It's that split-second gap between what happens and how you feel about it, the precise point where reality is written. That's where the next truth begins to emerge, the one the illusion has been hiding from you all along. There's a quiet contradiction at the center of almost every spiritual practice. People want to create reality, but they begin from the feeling that something is missing. They sit in meditation, repeat affirmations, visualize abundance, yet beneath every word lies a subtle tension, a whisper of lack. I want this because I don't have it. The signal is hidden, but the universe hears it clearly. And since the universe doesn't respond to words, it responds to frequency. It simply mirrors back the same state of lack you began with. This is the mistake almost everyone makes. They confuse desire with alignment. They think wanting something intensely will make it happen faster, but wanting in its usual form is an announcement of separation. It declares, "I am here. What I seek is over there." The more emotion you pour into the wanting, the stronger the boundary becomes. You are feeding the distance instead of dissolving it. Think about how a magnet works. It doesn't chase the metal, it simply is what it is, and the field does the rest. The magnet's power isn't in its wanting, it's in its state. The same is true of you. What you call manifestation is not about forcing outcomes, it's about matching the resonance of what already exists in potential form. But the mind rebels against that simplicity. It wants a formula, a technique, something to do. It wants control, not coherence. So it tries harder. More visualizations, more rituals, more effort. Yet the more you strive, the louder your vibration of "not yet" becomes. The universe responds faithfully, "not yet." If you want to see this mistake in real time, observe the moment you set an intention. Notice the tone behind the thought. Is there peace or urgency? Is it quiet, knowing, or silent, pleading? That emotional signature tells you everything. The universe doesn't decode sentences, it reads coherence. There's a story I once heard about a musician who spent years trying to compose a piece that would finally bring him success. Every note he wrote was brilliant, but strained. One night, exhausted, he gave up. He sat at the piano and played without agenda. No goal, no self-judgment, just sound. That night, he composed the work that changed his life. What shifted wasn't his talent, but his state. The universe could finally respond to a signal free of resistance. When you ask for something from a place of need, you're not actually communicating with the universe. You're echoing your own fear. It's like speaking into a canyon and mistaking the echo for an answer. That's why so many people feel stuck. Not because the field ignores them, but because it keeps returning exactly what they broadcast. You can sense this feedback loop if you pay attention to small, everyday examples. Imagine you're late to an appointment and filled with anxiety. The more you stress, the more red lights you hit. The slower people move, the more reality mirrors your tension. But when you finally surrender, when you stop fighting time, things mysteriously open. The next light turns green. A parking spot appears and you arrive without effort. It's not luck, it's coherence in motion. The real challenge is learning to want without wanting, to hold a clear vision while releasing the need for it to prove itself. That's what alignment feels like, steady, grounded, unhurried. It's the difference between asking the universe from emptiness and embodying the frequency of already having. The first is prayer as pleading, the second is prayer as remembering. You've probably noticed this pattern in relationships too. When you're desperate for connection, people pull away. When you're at ease in your own presence, they're drawn to you naturally. Reality operates on that same field of resonance. The universe doesn't grant requests, it synchronizes states. Try a small shift. Instead of saying, "I want peace," experiment with, "I am willing to feel peace now." Then pause. Don't repeat it like a mantra. Test it. Scan your body, your breath. Let any tension reveal where resistance still hides. You'll notice that peace doesn't need to be summoned. It's what remains when you stop demanding. That's the moment the frequency stabilizes and the external world begins to reorganize. The mistake almost everyone makes isn't that they dream too small. It's that they try to build reality while standing on the foundation of lack. They forget that the universe isn't a storehouse to be ordered from. It's a mirror that reflects being. It cannot give you what you're not yet capable of holding. As soon as you see this, something loosens inside. The struggle to manifest becomes unnecessary, almost absurd. You start to sense that the next step isn't about getting anything, but about perceiving the space where creation truly occurs. The tiny gap before reaction, the quiet hinge between impulse and awareness. And that's where the portal opens, the precise instant where reality begins to right itself. There's a fraction of a second, so brief that most people never notice it, that separates what happens from what you feel. A sound, a word, a glance reaches you, and before the emotion arises, before the mind interprets, there is a gap. That gap is the origin point of reality. In it, the field is still fluid, undefined, waiting for your observation to decide which version of the world will solidify next. You've lived through millions of those moments, yet almost all of them passed unnoticed, overwritten by habit. Observation is not the same as thinking. Thinking is commentary. It comes after. Observation happens before. It's the clean perception of what is, without the machinery of interpretation running over it. The portal opens precisely when you stay awake in that first instant, before the mind rushes in to name, compare, and defend. You're used to experiencing life as reaction, but reaction is always delayed, its memory replayed in real time. The act of observing interrupts that loop. Imagine watching rain slide down a window pane. Usually your mind labels it, rain, grey day, maybe I'll be late. But if you pause long enough to simply watch, no naming, no story, something subtle shifts. The line between you and the rain softens. The event is no longer happening to you. It's happening with you. That is the texture of true observation. It feels neutral yet alive, detached yet intimate. This is the same space quantum physicists discovered when they realized that measurement changes what's being measured. The observer and the observed are entangled. One cannot exist without the other. Consciousness isn't watching reality unfold, it's participating in its unfolding. Every time you witness something with full attention, you alter the field's probability landscape. That's not philosophy, it's mechanics. But to live that truth, you must retrain perception itself. You must slow down the mind's reflex to judge and replace it with the willingness to simply see. The next time you feel irritation, don't rush to fix it. Don't assign blame, don't analyze the cause. Instead, notice the moment before the irritation completes its shape. The faint spark in the chest, the tightening of the throat, that's where the portal begins to shimmer. If you stay with it, even for a breath, something remarkable happens. The emotion dissolves into energy. You feel it, but you are not inside it. That single breath of observation alters the trajectory of what follows. The argument that would have erupted never forms. The thought that would have spun into worry loses momentum. It's as if reality hesitates, waiting for your cue. The field wants coherence, but it can only align with the state you embody in the gap. For most people, that gap is filled instantly with old programming. The brain's predictive model runs faster than awareness, so you rarely experience the raw data of life, only your assumptions about it. You're not seeing your coworker, you're seeing your memory of how they treated you last week. You're not hearing a sentence, you're hearing your interpretation of what it means about you. Observation ends that distortion. It brings the event back to zero before meaning attaches. Try this quietly in the next conversation you have. As the other person speaks, listen not to the words, but to the subtle pauses between them, the rhythm of breath, the tone, the silence that carries meaning deeper than language. Don't plan your response. Just observe. You'll notice that the space itself begins to communicate. The conversation feels different, lighter. You are no longer trapped in defense. You are tuned to coherence. That's how the universe speaks, not through drama, but through precision. Every moment contains a hidden hinge that can swing either toward repetition or creation. Observation is the hand that chooses which way it turns. Still, the practice isn't comfortable. To observe means surrendering the illusion of control. It requires standing in uncertainty, allowing events to unfold without rushing to define them. The ego resists that void. It equates stillness with danger. But if you stay long enough, you'll sense another kind of safety, one that doesn't depend on prediction. It's the security of alignment, the knowing that reality reorganizes according to the clarity of your seeing. As you begin to live from this space, life feels less like a sequence of events and more like a single conversation, an unfolding dialogue between consciousness and form. Patterns start to reveal themselves. The same situations reappear not as punishment, but as opportunities to test your new level of observation. Each time you respond differently, the pattern shifts. The universe adjusts its reflection, confirming that the portal is open. Eventually you realize that the gap, that tiny interval between stimulus and response, isn't empty at all. It's full of intelligence, shimmering with possibility. Every transformation begins there, not in effort or intention, but in the quiet act of noticing before you react. And when you learn to stay inside that space, even for a breath longer than usual, something extraordinary starts to happen. Reality begins to lose its solidity. The world, once fixed and heavy, starts to respond like liquid light, bending, reshaping, aligning to the clarity of your gaze. And that's when you start to suspect that what you've been calling reality might not be as real as you once thought. There comes a moment when the world begins to behave differently, not dramatically, but unmistakably. The texture of things changes. You start to notice patterns that were always there but invisible to ordinary sight. Someone calls just as you think of them. You make a choice in stillness, and the environment seems to adjust around it. The timing of events becomes so precise that logic can't keep up. You look at the same world as before, yet it no longer feels the same. It's as though the background code has started to reveal itself. At first, it feels disorienting. You've spent a lifetime treating reality as fixed, a landscape made of matter, ruled by cause and effect, detached from your inner state. Now that certainty begins to dissolve. You start to see that what you once called real was only the version stabilized by your habitual observation. When your perception shifts, the external structure rearranges. People change tone, opportunities appear, circumstances stretch and bend. It's not that the laws of physics break, it's that consciousness begins to operate from a deeper law, one that underlies the visible. It's tempting to call this magic, but it isn't. It's coherence. When your inner and outer frequencies align, information flows more efficiently. You stop fighting the current, and the current starts to carry you. Scientists studying complex systems have observed a similar phenomenon. When elements of a system synchronize, the whole begins to behave as if guided by intelligence. The pattern self-organizes. That's what happens when consciousness becomes consistent. The universe responds with the elegance of a self-balancing equation. You may have noticed this during moments of deep clarity. When you feel peaceful, events seem to arrange themselves smoothly. When you're chaotic inside, the world mirrors that chaos back. But here, the relationship becomes explicit, no longer philosophical but experiential. You begin to see the symmetry in real time. It's both astonishing and humbling, because if reality changes with your observation, then responsibility expands too. You can no longer blame coincidence or circumstance. You realize you are participating in the calibration of the field itself. This recognition can be unsettling. The ground you've walked on for decades begins to feel like water. Things once certain, the solidity of objects, the consistency of others, the supposed neutrality of the world, become fluid. You start noticing that people act differently around you, not because they've changed, but because the version of them you now meet matches your new frequency. It's not manipulation, it's resonance. Every interaction becomes an experiment in vibration. There's a phase when this awareness feels like a secret you can't explain. You try to share it, but words collapse under its simplicity. You say, "It's like everything responds," and others nod politely, thinking you've gone abstract. But you know the difference. You can feel when something is orchestrated rather than accidental. The invisible symmetry begins to announce itself everywhere, in timing, in symbols, in the way one event folds perfectly into the next. Life stops feeling random and starts to feel intelligent. Still, the ego tries to claim ownership. "I'm manifesting this," it says. "I've learned the trick." And almost instantly the coherence falters. The field tightens. Reality turns opaque again. That's the universe's gentle correction, reminding you that the flow is not personal power, but alignment. The moment you try to possess it, it disappears. You're not the author, you're the instrument being tuned. Try remembering a moment when you felt completely in sync, walking into a room and knowing exactly what to say, finding yourself at the right place at the right time without planning it. In those moments you weren't thinking, you were observing from stillness. That's the state where reality stops being reality and becomes participation, an unfolding dialogue between you and everything that exists. If you pay attention, you'll sense that even matter responds differently. Light feels sharper, colors more alive. The air itself seems to carry intention. When your mind quiets, the world reveals layers of communication that were previously drowned in noise. Not through supernatural visions, but through precision. Reality begins to echo your clarity. But this stage also introduces new tests. Because when everything starts aligning, it's easy to assume the journey is complete. You think, "I've understood how it works." That certainty is the next trap. The universe, infinitely patient, begins to introduce distortions, small frictions, emotional triggers, unexpected chaos, not to punish you, but to see whether your awareness remains stable when coherence breaks. This is the point where awakening becomes dangerous. The more conscious you become, the subtler the tests get. They no longer come as external problems, but as invitations to see whether you can hold observation even when the mirror reflects confusion. Can you remain aligned when the signal turns to static? Can you still sense the intelligence behind what seems like disorder? When reality stops being reality, it doesn't become fantasy, it becomes feedback. Every experience becomes a message from the field asking, "Can you see me even now? Can you stay aware when the symmetry twists?" That's how the universe verifies your understanding. And that's where the next passage begins, the point where awareness itself starts to cost something real. Awareness sounds beautiful in theory, radiant, freeing, expansive. People imagine that once consciousness awakens, suffering dissolves and life becomes effortless. But what most forget is that awareness doesn't just illuminate peace, it also exposes everything that was hiding in the dark. The moment you start to see clearly, nothing can stay buried. That's the real cost. The light reveals not only the path forward, but the weight you've been carrying without knowing it. The universe tests awakening with precision. It sends back every pattern you thought you had outgrown, sharper, louder, and closer than before. The same arguments return, the same disappointments, the same emotional storms you believed you'd transcended. But this time, there's a difference. You can no longer blame the world. Once you know that reality reflects your state, the mirror becomes mercilessly honest. There's no one left to fight except your own frequency. That's when the old self begins to panic. Awareness threatens its survival because it thrives on unconsciousness, on stories, defenses, and projections. As your observation deepens, that old structure starts to disintegrate, and with it goes the illusion of stability. People around you might feel uneasy, even hostile. Relationships shift. Familiar identities begin to crumble. You may find yourself wondering whether awakening has made life harder, not easier. And in a way it has, because now every moment demands truth. The price of awareness is the death of pretense. You can't pretend not to see. You can't hide behind your favorite rationalizations or emotional shortcuts. When irritation arises, you feel its full vibration. When fear surfaces, you recognize the mechanism behind it. Awareness doesn't allow distraction. It asks you to stand inside discomfort until it reveals what it's teaching. That level of honesty burns, but it purifies. Imagine being in a room where the lights are suddenly turned on after years of dimness. The clarity is overwhelming at first. You see the dust, the cracks in the walls, the stains you never noticed. The instinct is to turn the lights off again, to return to the soothing shadows of ignorance. But the universe doesn't let you. Once awareness opens, it rarely closes. The only way forward is through the discomfort, cleaning what the light exposes one piece at a time. At this stage, chaos often increases. It's not punishment, it's recalibration. The outer world starts rearranging itself to match your new vibration, and that process looks messy. Things fall apart, jobs, friendships, plans, not because you're doing something wrong, but because structures built on the old level of consciousness can't sustain the new one. The collapse is necessary space-making. You're not losing stability, you're shedding the false sense of it. And while the intellect might understand that, the nervous system doesn't. It reacts with anxiety, confusion, even grief. Awareness forces you to feel what was previously numbed. Every unprocessed emotion surfaces for resolution. That's why many who begin awakening feel more emotional than ever. The flood isn't regression, it's release. You're clearing what blocked perception for decades. The body finally catches up to the consciousness that woke before it. You'll notice the universe mirrors this process through synchronicities that cut sharply. A casual conversation triggers a deep insight. A random encounter reopens an old wound. Everything becomes meaningful because everything is communicating. Awareness heightens sensitivity until even silence feels loaded with information. The cost is that you can no longer rest in distraction. The movie of life becomes transparent. You see the projection behind every frame. And yet, beneath the turbulence, a strange steadiness emerges. The chaos outside no longer defines you. You begin to sense that awareness itself is the ground, that clarity, not control, is what holds you steady. You learn to let the storm pass through without needing to fix it. That's how the field tests your coherence. The greater your awareness, the subtler the provocations become. You may notice how certain people unconsciously try to pull you back into old dynamics, how situations arise just to measure whether your observation holds under pressure. When you stay conscious in those moments, something alchemical happens. The energy that once triggered reaction now feeds understanding. The very pattern that tried to pull you down becomes the doorway to deeper balance. You realize that awareness doesn't protect you from life, it invites you into it fully without filters. The price is rawness, the reward is freedom. But the universe, ever precise, has one more test before clarity stabilizes. It will offer you a moment that feels like contradiction. Just when everything seems to align, something inside resists again. That's not failure. It's the next threshold, the breaking point between effort and allowing, between observation and surrender. The place where awareness learns that its final step is not mastery, but release. And that's exactly where the next passage begins to unfold. There is a moment in every transformation when everything inside you wants to stop. You feel as if you've walked to the edge of understanding and can't take another step without losing something vital. Your identity, your control, your certainty about how the world works. Up to this point, awareness has been a light you could still hold in your hands. But now that light turns around and starts shining through you, dissolving what you thought was you. This is the breaking point. Not the collapse of your life, but the collapse of the illusion that you were ever the one holding it together. Most people turn back here. They were fine observing patterns, recognizing synchronicities, even sensing the mirror of the universe. But surrender, letting go of the sense of personal control, that feels like annihilation. The ego whispers, if I stop managing everything, chaos will consume me. Yet it's exactly the opposite. The chaos exists because you're still trying to manage the current. Think of a river running wild after a storm. You can fight to swim upstream, exhausting yourself against the flow, or you can surrender to the water and let it carry you. The current doesn't drown you. Resistance does. The breaking point is the instant you realize that letting go isn't failure. It's the doorway through which a different order of intelligence begins to move your life. Until now, observation has been your instrument of awakening. You've practiced watching without judging, feeling without reacting. But at this threshold, even observation must release its grip. True awareness doesn't watch from a distance anymore. It merges with what it observes. The observer and the observed dissolve into one continuous field. That's the twist most people never expect. Awakening is not about becoming more in control of reality. It's about disappearing into the coherence that was creating it all along. Of course, the ego interprets that disappearance as death. When you stop defending your identity, everything built around it begins to shake. Your opinions lose their sharpness. The need to prove, to win, to explain, all of it starts to feel irrelevant. It's disorienting at first, like walking through fog. But if you stay still long enough, you notice something subtle. What you called fog is actually light too bright for your old eyes to handle. At this stage, the universe starts to test your capacity for allowing. You'll feel contradictions arise, moments when life seems to betray your progress. Just as you begin to feel free, an old fear returns. Just as peace arrives, something triggers your anger. It's tempting to think you're slipping backward. But the test isn't about regression. It's about integration. The field is asking, can you remain open when the old patterns revisit? Can you hold space for both clarity and confusion without splitting them into good and bad? If you can, something extraordinary happens. The sharp boundary between light and shadow begins to fade. You realize they were never enemies. They were both expressions of the same source. This is why the twist feels paradoxical. The deeper you awaken, the less you distinguish between what's spiritual and what's ordinary. The entire world becomes sacred terrain, including the mess. Especially the mess. At the breaking point, time itself feels strange. The linear sense of cause and effect starts to blur. Events fold into each other, sometimes rearranging in ways that make no logical sense. You might think of someone seconds before they call, dream of a conversation before it happens, or feel a surge of emotion that belongs to no clear origin. Don't rush to explain it. The mind can't map the geometry of the field, it can only participate in it. What you're experiencing is coherence widening, consciousness beginning to operate beyond the limits of linear logic. And yet, the deeper current of this moment is profoundly simple. The universe is asking only one question: can you trust me now? Not as an idea, but as a felt truth. Can you release the last fragments of the self that demanded control and allow life to move through you directly? The test isn't passed through effort, it's passed through stillness. The paradox of awakening is that the final step looks like doing nothing, but it's the hardest nothing you'll ever attempt. When you finally stop struggling, you notice a shift almost too quiet to name. The pressure dissolves. The river that once seemed wild now feels intelligent, guiding itself toward its own ocean. You were never separate from it. You only imagined you were swimming against it. That realization breaks the last illusion. the belief that awareness belongs to you. Awareness was never yours. You belong to it. And once that insight lands, even briefly, the entire system reorients. The need to control transforms into a kind of reverence. You stop asking life for certainty and begin listening for coordination. You sense that the same intelligence shaping galaxies is shaping your next breath. That recognition softens everything, and in that softness, something inside you reorganizes. Because now you begin to see the pattern not as a concept but as living proof. The universe isn't testing you to punish, it's testing you to prepare. It's aligning you with the deeper code that has always governed the field, the silent logic that reveals itself only after surrender. And that code, once glimpsed, begins to rewrite how you experience every movement of energy, every exchange, every thought. The breaking point isn't the end of awakening. It's the threshold where revelation begins to translate into structure, where the hidden architecture of the universe starts to show its face. The moment you stop trying to manipulate reality and begin to observe it from stillness, something quiet but radical happens. The pattern beneath appearances begins to unveil itself. The field that once seemed random now speaks in symmetry. The events that once felt accidental start forming equations. It's not that life suddenly becomes perfect, it becomes intelligible. The noise resolves into signal, and you start hearing the logic behind creation itself. That logic is the universe code. The code was never hidden, only filtered by perception. You've been reading it your whole life through timing, emotion, and intuition, but without a conscious decoder. It's written not in words, but in alignment. Every thought, every decision, every emotional frequency sends out a vibration that reorganizes the field accordingly. The universe doesn't interpret language, it interprets coherence. It listens for harmony between what you think, what you feel, and what you do. When those three are aligned, the signal becomes unmistakable. This is why judgment collapses the connection. The moment you label something as wrong, unfair, or meaningless, you distort your signal. Judgment fractures coherence because it divides the field. It creates an us and a them, and here and a there. But when you observe without judgment, the wave stabilizes. The field mirrors unity, because that's what you're emitting. It's the same principle musicians call resonance. When two strings vibrate at the same frequency, one makes the other sing. The universe operates the same way. You might think this sounds poetic, but it's grounded in physics. Quantum coherence, the state where particles behave as one unified system, depends on synchronization. The slightest interference, the smallest judgment, breaks the pattern. Consciousness works identically. When your inner state becomes consistent, the field responds with consistency. You're no longer broadcasting conflicting signals, and reality stops contradicting itself. What you once called luck is simply coherence expressing itself through visible form. There's an intelligence behind that coherence, not a distant deity but a self-organizing principle that uses contrast as communication. Every challenge, every emotion, every coincidence is a line of code written for your awareness. The universe doesn't punish or reward, it teaches through reflection. When you emit confusion, it reflects uncertainty. When you embody clarity, it reflects order. The feedback is instantaneous once you're still enough to perceive it. Try noticing how this plays out in your everyday life. When you wake up hurried and scattered, the world seems to conspire with that energy. Delays, miscommunications, irritations. But when you start the day in calm attention, things flow effortlessly. The external events aren't different. Your signal is. The code rearranges itself to echo your frequency. Reality isn't responding to your intentions, but to your integration, the coherence between your internal states. This realization changes how you relate to everything. You stop asking the universe to give you what you want and start asking it to show you where you're incoherent. Each resistance becomes information. If a situation feels blocked, it's not the world closing doors, it's your vibration colliding with itself. The code doesn't fail, it reveals. And here lies the deepest secret. The code isn't external at all. You are the living interface of it. The universe doesn't operate through formulas, it operates through awareness. When awareness observes itself, free from distortion, the pattern becomes transparent. It's as though the entire cosmos turns its face toward you, recognizing that you've remembered the language it's been speaking all along. In that recognition, something subtle yet unmistakable occurs. The feedback loop between you and the world tightens. Manifestation stops feeling like creation and starts feeling like translation. You're not forcing reality to become something new. You're decoding what was always present. The universe, relieved that you finally understand, begins to respond with extraordinary precision. Answers arrive before questions fully form. People show up at perfect timing. Obstacles dissolve because they've served their purpose. But the deeper the coherence, the higher the demand for integrity. The field mirrors you without filter. If you try to use this understanding for control, it immediately deconstructs your motives. Every distortion surfaces faster. The code doesn't allow manipulation, it only amplifies authenticity. To operate in harmony with it, you must live in radical transparency. Every thought, every emotion, every hidden belief participates in shaping the mirror. Nothing can be concealed in a coherent system. At first, this can feel overwhelming, like standing in front of a mirror that never blinks, but soon it becomes liberating. You realize the mirror is not judging, it's calibrating. It wants you aligned because coherence sustains creation. The universe's language is balance, and its grammar is observation. Once you begin listening from that place, you stop seeking meaning and start receiving it directly through experience. The code reveals itself most clearly in silence, in the pause between thoughts, in the stillness between breaths. That's where the raw data of the field translates into knowing. The answers are never loud. They arrive as resonance, as the feeling of course. And as that understanding deepens, the separation between you and the universe dissolves further. The code isn't something you decipher once, it's a living rhythm you learn to inhabit. Eventually you notice that the mirror doesn't just reflect you, it is you. Reality is no longer external feedback, but continuous participation. And as that awareness stabilizes, the transformation becomes visible to others. Not because you preach it, but because your presence itself begins to transmit coherence. The energy that once controlled you reorganizes, flowing through you like music returning to its original key. And in that resonance, the world around you begins to move in harmony, quietly preparing for the next phase of awakening, when the transformation becomes visible from the outside in. You don't notice it at first. There's no flash of light, no sudden breakthrough, no grand announcement from the universe. Change begins in the most unremarkable moments, in the way you pause before reacting, the way your breath settles faster after irritation, the way you start hearing silence even in noise. The transformation doesn't arrive as drama, it arrives as disappearance. The old you simply stops showing up. People begin to sense it before you do. They can't quite name it, but they feel something different in your presence. A steadiness, a space, an unspoken permission to exhale. Conversations that used to drain you now unfold without resistance. You no longer reach for the same defenses. It's as though an invisible layer between you and the world has thinned, and life is touching you directly, without distortion. This is the silent phase of awakening, when awareness stops being an idea and becomes embodied. The mind, once frantic to explain everything, grows quiet because it's no longer in charge. You start to operate from a subtler intelligence, one that doesn't argue or predict, but responds in real time. It's not passivity, it's precision. Life moves through you, not around you. You might find yourself standing in a familiar situation, the same coworker, the same pressure, the same tension, and realizing with mild astonishment that the reaction never comes. The old emotion tries to rise, but it has nowhere to land. The circuitry has been rewired. You're no longer living from the conditioned program, you're living from presence. This is how evolution actually happens, silently, through the replacement of reaction with observation. The transformation becomes visible, not in what you do, but in what you no longer need to do. You stop explaining yourself, stop defending, Stop rehearsing future outcomes. Even your ambitions begin to shift, not because you've lost drive, but because your actions now emerge from coherence instead of compensation. You no longer chase alignment. You are alignment, and life responds accordingly. There's an unmistakable simplicity to this stage. You notice beauty in ordinary things again. The texture of sunlight on a wall, the hum of distant conversation, the rhythm of your footsteps matching the world's pulse. These aren't poetic distractions. They're signs that perception has expanded. You're no longer scanning reality for threats or opportunities. You're perceiving it as an extension of your own consciousness. In this quiet integration, the ego doesn't vanish, it softens. It becomes a useful instrument rather than a master. You can still plan, still desire, still decide, but the compulsive tension behind those movements is gone. You begin to understand that free will isn't about control. It's about harmony. You act when the energy aligns, not when fear insists. This is why things begin to flow again. The universe doesn't need to resist you anymore. Externally, nothing dramatic may change, yet everything does. People start responding differently because they're no longer reacting to your unconscious projections. Situations that once repeated endlessly dissolve without confrontation. It's not that you've escaped the cycle, you've simply stopped feeding it. The field rearranges itself quietly, almost respectfully, around your new frequency. This is why the transformation is silent. It's not performed, it's transmitted. You become the message you were once trying to speak. You used to chase synchronicities, now they orbit naturally around you. The same intelligence that organizes stars begins to coordinate your everyday life with the same precision. You start to notice that even your pauses have power, that your very presence shapes the room before you say a word. And yet, the more effortless things become, the deeper humility takes root. Because you know you're not doing any of it. The transformation isn't achievement, it's alignment with what was always true. It's like realizing the wind was carrying you all along. You just stopped resisting the direction. That humility becomes its own kind of strength, one that doesn't need validation to feel real. There's also a tenderness that emerges here, a quiet compassion for those still caught in the illusion you once inhabited. You don't feel the need to awaken anyone. You understand that each consciousness blooms on its own schedule. Your role isn't to teach, but to embody, to hold a vibration steady enough that others can recognize themselves in it. In your stillness, they remember their own. This phase doesn't announce itself as enlightenment. It simply feels natural. The extraordinary hides inside the ordinary until you can no longer tell them apart. Silence becomes full, stillness becomes active, and presence becomes the most practical way to live. Reality itself feels more responsive, not because you control it, but because there's nothing left in you that resists it. But even here, the journey continues. The field, ever attentive, will test whether this stillness can remain intact amid movement, whether the new coherence can express itself through the world rather than apart from it. The universe, precise as always, begins preparing the next invitation to step out of silence and live the manual you've just received, not as concept, but as ongoing conversation with everything that exists. So here you are, aware, still, and finally seeing that reality was never happening to you. It was always unfolding from you. The universe didn't hand you a new power. It simply revealed what was always yours, the ability to observe without distortion, to act without resistance, to live as coherence itself. The manual of reality isn't a book you read. It's the vibration you become. Now the invitation is simple. Keep observing. In every glance, every breath, every silence, let awareness write the next line of your story. If you've made it this far, write "I'm awake and observing" in the comments. I want to know who crossed the threshold. And if this resonated with you, watch one of the videos appearing on your screen right now. Each one continues the conversation that the universe has already started through you.